Soft lies may comfort you, but only the hard, metallic truth will ever truly set you free. We aren't afraid to ask the difficult questions and show the reality that others ignore. Click subscribe today for the most honest storytelling on the web. The morning my grandmother was buried, someone emptied my savings account, all $87,000 of it. Every dollar I had scraped together over 6 years of night shifts, missed birthdays, and saying no to myself so I could finally say yes to a future I built alone. I didn't find out until I was still in my black dress, standing in the parking lot of the funeral home, checking my phone because my landlord had texted about the automatic rent payment failing. I stared at the screen. I refreshed it twice. The balance read $14. $14. My name is Clara. I'm 31 years old. I'm a physical therapist, and for 6 years, I had been the person in my family who showed up. The one who drove 3 hours every other weekend to check on my grandmother after her first stroke. The one who coordinated her medications, argued with her insurance company, and sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand during the nights when she was too scared to sleep alone. I did it because I loved her. I did it because she was the only person in my family who ever made me feel like I mattered. And I did it while my Uncle Marcus and his wife Diane sat 2 states away and called once a month, if that. My grandmother's name was Ruth. She was 79 years old and she smelled like lavender and old books. And she used to say that the only currency worth earning in this life was the kind people couldn't take from you. She meant integrity. She meant showing up. She meant being the kind of person who stays. I thought I understood what she meant. I didn't understand yet how wrong I was about the people around me. Let me go back to the beginning, because the theft didn't start the day she died. It started much earlier than that, in the quiet ways that family betrayal always does, slowly, and then all at once. My grandmother owned a small house in Cartersville, Georgia. Nothing grand, but it was hers paid off, tidy, with a garden she tended herself until her hands wouldn't cooperate anymore. She also had a savings account she'd built over 40 years of working as a seamstress, and later as an alterations specialist for a department store that no longer exists. When I moved back to the Southeast after graduate school, she asked me to help her manage her finances. Her eyesight was going. She didn't trust the internet. She trusted me. I set up her online banking. I helped her pay her bills. I organized her paperwork into a binder that I labeled and updated every time something changed. I had access to her accounts because she gave it to me, and I used that access exactly the way she intended to take care of her, never to take anything for myself. My Uncle Marcus knew I had that access. I told him directly, during one of the few phone calls he actually answered, so there would be no confusion about who was managing things. He said, and I remember this clearly, "That's fine. You've always been the responsible one." There was something in his voice when he said it, not gratitude. Exactly. Something flatter than that. I should have listened to that flatness. My grandmother passed on a Tuesday in October, quietly, in her own bed, which was exactly what she had wanted. I had been with her the weekend before. We watched old game shows and I painted her nails a pale pink. She picked out herself and she told me she wasn't afraid. I believed her. I held her hand and I told her I loved her. And when I drove home Sunday night, I cried for most of the 3 hours because some part of me already knew. The funeral was Friday. My Uncle Marcus and Aunt Diane arrived Thursday evening. I had arranged everything: the service, the flowers, the reception, the catering. I had notified the necessary people, handled the death certificate paperwork, contacted her attorney about the will. I did all of it the way I had done everything else for the last 6 years, without being asked and without expecting thanks. What I did not expect was what happened to my own money. Standing in that parking lot, staring at $14 where $87,000 used to be, my first reaction wasn't panic. It was a strange, cold stillness, the kind your body produces when something is too large to process all at once. I scrolled through the transaction history with my thumb. There were 4 transfers, all made within a 2-hour window the previous evening. While I had been at the funeral home finalizing the viewing arrangements, someone had logged into my personal checking account and moved my money out in chunks, just under the reporting threshold. $22,000. $21,000. $22,000. $22,000. Gone to an external account I didn't recognize. I sat down on the curb in my black dress and my good heels, and I just sat there for a moment. Then I called my bank. The representative confirmed what I was seeing. The transfers had been initiated from a device that had previously been used to access my account, which meant someone had logged in from a trusted device, bypassed the basic security flag, and moved my money methodically in the way that someone does when they've had time to research how to do it without triggering an automatic hold. I asked them to freeze the account. I asked them to begin a fraud investigation. I wrote down every name and reference number they gave me. My hand was steady. I don't know how, but it was. Then I drove to my grandmother's house, where my uncle and his wife were staying for the week. I want to be precise about what I walked into, because the detail matters. When I opened the front door, Marcus and Diane were sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table eating takeout. There were boxes in the hallway, her things already sorted into piles. They had been in the house less than 24 hours. Marcus looked up when I came in. He didn't ask how the arrangements had gone. He said, "There's food if you want some." I set my purse down on the counter. I kept my voice level. "Marcus," I said, "someone transferred all the money out of my personal checking account last night. $87,000. Can you tell me anything about that?" He picked up his fork. He didn't look at me when he answered. "We needed it," he said. "You've been living off this family for years. It was time things got balanced out." I had prepared myself for denial. I had prepared myself for confusion, for anger, for him to pretend he didn't know what I was talking about. I had not prepared myself for that, for the complete absence of shame in his voice, for the way he said we needed it, the way you'd say we needed milk, as though my savings were a household resource he was entitled to redistribute. Diane didn't look up from her phone. I stood there for exactly 3 seconds. Then I said, "Okay, thank you for being honest with me about that." Marcus finally looked up. Something moved across his face, not guilt, but surprise. He had expected me to cry, I think, or to beg, or to do what I had done my whole life, which was absorb the blow and keep going and never make anyone uncomfortable about the cost. I picked up my purse. I walked out. I sat in my car in my grandmother's driveway, in the dark, and I let myself feel everything I needed to feel for approximately 10 minutes. Then I dried my face and I made a list. What I knew, Marcus had admitted it directly. He had access to a trusted device because, and I was already sure of this, he had gone through my grandmother's house and found the old laptop I used to use when I stayed with her on weekends. I had logged into my banking app on that laptop more than once. I had trusted her house. I had not thought to log out from a device inside the home of the person I loved most. What I had, a verbal confession, a transaction record, a bank fraud investigation already opened, and 6 years of documentation of every financial arrangement I had ever managed for my grandmother, every bill paid, every account entry, every correspondence with her insurance and her attorney, all of it organized in a binder that was currently sitting in the trunk of my car because I had brought it to give to her estate attorney that week. What I did not have, the external account number those transfers went to. Not yet. I am a physical therapist by training, which means I understand something about recovery. It is rarely fast. It is almost never linear, but it always begins with an accurate assessment of what you're actually dealing with. I spent that night in a hotel and I made calls. The first was to my bank's fraud department to follow up and provide Marcus's name as the suspected initiator. The second was to my grandmother's estate attorney, a woman named Patricia, whom I had worked with closely during the estate planning process and who answered her cell phone at 9:30 at night when I explained the situation. The third call was to a friend from college who was now a family law attorney in Atlanta and who told me 2 very important things. First, that what Marcus had done was wire fraud, a federal crime, and second, that the timing the day of his mother's funeral would matter significantly if this went to court. It went to court. I won't compress 6 months of legal process into something that sounds easy, because it wasn't. There were days I went to work and treated patients and helped them regain function in their hands and their knees and their shoulders, and came home and sat at my kitchen table surrounded by documents and felt like I was disappearing. There were nights I questioned myself whether I had somehow contributed to this, whether I had been naive, whether my grandmother would have wanted me to pursue it. I thought about her often during those months. I thought about what she said about the currency worth earning. I thought she would want me to stay. The bank investigation confirmed that the transfers originated from an IP address registered to a house in Marietta, Georgia. Marcus and Diane's home address. The external account the money went to was a joint account in both their names. The estate attorney confirmed that Marcus had also, in the 72 hours following my grandmother's death, attempted to access her estate accounts using information he had found in her house information I had organized in that binder before the estate was legally frozen pending probate. He had not succeeded with the estate accounts. He had succeeded with mine. The criminal charge was filed 5 months after the funeral. I gave my statement to the detective assigned to the case in a small beige office with a box of tissues on the table that I did not need. I had cried everything I needed to cry already. What I felt sitting in that office was not grief, And not anger. It was something quieter. It was the feeling of being believed. There is something I want to tell you about that, because I think it matters. When you go to law enforcement with financial fraud committed by a family member, people often expect you to waver. They ask questions that feel like they're waiting for you to second-guess yourself. The detective asked me 3 times, in different ways, whether I was certain I wanted to proceed given that this was my uncle, and 3 times I said yes. Because the question assumed that family membership is a reason to absorb theft, and I had spent 31 years absorbing things from people who were related to me by blood, and I was finished. Marcus and Diane were charged with wire fraud and theft. The civil suit I filed simultaneously resulted in a judgment against them for the full amount, plus legal fees. To satisfy the judgment, they were required to liquidate a significant portion of assets, including, ultimately, a vacation property in North Carolina that Diane had purchased the previous year, and that her sister had mentioned to me once, in passing, at a family event I almost didn't attend. When Marcus's attorney called mine to attempt a last-minute settlement negotiation, the offer they made was 60 cents on the dollar. My attorney called me to relay it. I said no. She said, "Are you sure? This could end it faster." I said, "I'm sure." She paused. Then she said, "Good." The criminal case resulted in a guilty plea. Marcus received 18 months of supervised probation, mandatory financial restitution, and a permanent fraud conviction on his record. His attorney argued for leniency given his age and the family circumstances. The judge noted, on the record, that the circumstances were in fact an aggravating factor, not a mitigating one. Premeditation during a period of family grief, she said, represented a particular kind of cruelty. I sat in that courtroom and I listened to those words and I thought about my grandmother's kitchen and the lavender smell of her house and the way she used to look at me like I was something worth looking at. There's a part of this story I haven't told yet, and it belongs here. During the probate process, my grandmother's will was read. I had helped her draft it 3 years earlier with Patricia, and I knew its general contents, the house and her remaining savings, were to be divided equally among her children and grandchildren, with a few specific bequests for people she cared about. Marcus and I were both named. The distribution was straightforward. What I hadn't known, because my grandmother had arranged it separately and privately with Patricia, was that there was a letter. She had written it 18 months before she died and asked Patricia to hold it and give it to me personally after the estate was settled. Patricia gave it to me on a Tuesday afternoon in her office. It was 2 pages, handwritten, in my grandmother's careful cursive, and I am not going to tell you everything she wrote because some things belong only to the person they were written for. But I will tell you this, she knew. She had watched her son for decades. She had seen the way he looked at things that belonged to other people. She wrote that she had tried, for years, to give him more attention, more money, more chances, and that it had never been enough, and that she had finally understood that some people mistake kindness for weakness and will keep testing the boundary until you draw it clearly. She wrote, "I am so sorry I could not protect you from him while I was alive. I hope you can protect yourself now that I am gone." I folded that letter and put it in the same binder where I kept everything else, and I drove home and I sat with it for a long time. I want to talk about what I did after, because I think that's the part people most want to know, not just whether I got the money back, but what I did with myself once the fight was over. I got the money back. Almost all of it, the judgment covered the principal plus interest, and after legal fees, I netted roughly $81,000. I put it back into savings and I looked at it for a few weeks, and then I did something I had been too afraid to do before all of this happened. I had been telling myself for years that I wanted to open my own practice. Small, focused, the kind of physical therapy clinic that actually spends time with patients instead of rotating them through in 20-minute increments. I had the training. I had the hours. I had always had the idea. What I'd had instead of action was a constant, low-level sense that the timing wasn't right, that I didn't have enough cushion, that something would go wrong. Something had gone wrong. I had survived it. The cushion was back. I named the clinic Steadfast Physical Therapy. I opened it 14 months after my grandmother died. My first hire was a front desk coordinator named Yolanda, who had worked in healthcare administration for 15 years and who cried during her interview when I described what kind of place I wanted it to be. My second hire was a PTA, a physical therapist assistant named Devin, 26 years old, the first person in his family to work in healthcare, who reminded me of myself at his age in ways that made me feel like I was doing something right. My grandmother's house sold during probate. My share of the proceeds went into a small college fund I set up in her name. accessible to any grandchild of hers who needed it. I sent Marcus a formal letter through my attorney informing him that I considered the matter closed and did not wish to have further contact. He did not respond, which was the best possible outcome. I'm not going to tell you I'm fine all the time. There are still moments sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store, or hearing a song she liked, or driving past the exit for Cartersville on the interstate when the grief is right there, as present as it was the day she died. I miss her constantly and specifically. I miss the particular way she listened to me. I miss being known by someone who had known me my whole life. But I also know something now that I didn't know before all of this, and it's this. The people who love you correctly don't ask you to shrink yourself to make them comfortable. They don't call your boundaries selfishness. They don't mistake your kindness for a resource they can extract. And when you meet the people who do those things, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is believe them the first time they show you who they are. My grandmother tried to teach me that. It just took me longer than it should have to learn it. She also used to say that karma doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, on a Tuesday afternoon, in a letter written in careful cursive by the person who loved you most. I have that letter. I keep it in my desk at the clinic, in the top drawer, where I can take it out on the days when I need to remember why I built this life and who I built it for. If you're watching this and you have someone in your life who makes you feel like your love is a debt you'll never finish paying, I want you to hear me when I say this. You are allowed to stop paying. You are allowed to protect what you built. You are allowed to draw the line and hold it and not apologize for the fact that it needed to be drawn. That is not cruelty. That is not selfishness. That is the only currency that actually holds its value. If this story stayed with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've been through something like this, leave a comment because you are not alone and your story matters. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.